The Ukraine-Russia war has been a wake-up call for Europe and in particular for Germany, which had to reverse its traditionally pacifist-minded attitude by increasing its military budget by 100 billion euros. I sat down with former German Vice Chancellor and Foreign Minister Sigmar Gabriel here on the sidelines of the Antalya Diplomacy Forum to discuss Germany's role in the Russia-Ukraine war. I'm Ali Aslan, and this is One on One. Sigmar Gabriel, thank you so much for joining us. These are difficult times for the world, but particularly for Europe. Once again, we see war breaking out in the heart of Europe in the 21st century. As someone who's gone and lived through the Cold War, did you think we would find ourselves here back again?
Maybe that's my fear. I'm afraid that the last Cold War maybe was much easier and more comfortable than the next one. In times where we have cyber attacks, where misinformation, fake news are the new normal, a border on which on both sides heavily weaponized armies are standing in front of each other, this time is much more dangerous than the Cold War which we knew in the last century. So maybe we're heading to more difficult times than we thought, but for the next time I think what we need is first of all ceasefire in Ukraine. That's far away from crisis solution, but crisis management, humanitarian corridors, ceasefire, that's what the people in Ukraine, what they need.
Minimal steps certainly have to be taken now to alleviate the suffering of the Ukrainian people. You were Vice Chancellor and Foreign Minister in Germany for a very long time, and as such had to defend and justify Germany's somewhat pacifist attitudes towards the rest of the world. Now Germany did a 180. Chancellor Olaf Scholz just announced that Germany would raise its military budget by 100 billion euros. Is that a wake-up call? Is the war in Ukraine the wake-up call that Germany needed?
Of course it's a wake-up call. On the other hand side, we had a debate for more than 10 years that the burden sharing between the US and Europe for financing the defense spending was not very fair. The European Union and the United States of America are economically both equal, on equal size. And the Americans, from my understanding, were right when they said it's not very fair that we are taking 70% of the defense spending of Europe. So you have to step up to do more for your own security. That Germany was so reluctant and did not enough was a mistake. I said it years before, but now they will step up, and unfortunately we are pushed in the direction that NATO in the future will really at the borders to Russia, which we are not today. Putin always argues NATO would have come closer and closer to Russia. Yes, we have more member states of NATO which have a border to Russia, but NATO was not at the border. NATO decided in 1997, because of the security concerns of Russia, not to deploy troops and weapons to the east flank of NATO. This will now be the case, and therefore also Germany has to deploy its own means to the east flank of NATO.
Germany, of course, is in a bit of a difficult, delicate spot. He is very much dependent on Russian oil and gas. You were part of the government that approved, or at least supported the decision to go ahead with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. It is now being halted due to current events. Is that the right decision?
It is the right decision. You can't do business with a country which breaks the minimum standard of international law by attacking a neighbor state with a 20th century war with tanks and soldiers. The reason why we are so dependent, not only in Germany, but also, of course also in Germany, is a decision which were taken in 2002 in the European Union. At that time, the great idea was to liberalize the energy markets, to bring the states out of their responsibility for energy security, which they had until this time. And the idea was that markets could deliver energy security in a much more efficient way and with lower costs for the consumers. And this was the case. But at the end, we were in a situation where, of course, companies, when you allow them to do whatever they want, they will search for the cheapest resource. And this was Russian pipeline gas. And that's the reason we are in a trap. I think we will see that Germany and the Europe as a whole will diversify its energy supplies, but not from one day to the next.
Yeah, indeed, not from one day to the next, because the Americans have already said they're going to stop all imports of Russian oil and gas. It's of course the Ukrainian side is demanding the same as a show of solidarity and support from the European side, Germany in particular. But Olaf Scholz once again has said it's not going to happen overnight.
My question to the Ukrainians would be: do you think that we will strengthen the alliance against Russia by hurting the German economy and the German citizens and the Italians and the Bulgarians and many others in a way where will we not be able to be economic stable and social stable? Do you think if we hurt ourselves harder than the Russians, that will help Ukraine? I don't think so.
Ukraine's President Zelensky has repeatedly asked for a no-fly zone over Ukraine, something that NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg has denied, something that many European countries are saying, no, that would be a catastrophic move. This would actually drag us into the war. Is that also your opinion?
The Ukrainian president is asking for a no-fly zone because they are afraid that Russia would be able and willing to turn Kiev into a second Grozny or Aleppo, which they did, bombing civilians and destroying all the houses, hospitals, schools, kindergartens, and that's the reason he is asking for that. The difficulty is that if NATO members would attack Russian military airplanes directly, which we would have to do in a no-fly zone, then we are in a direct war between NATO and Russia. And that means we are in a war with nuclear means, nuclear arms. Russia will immediately use their tactical nuclear arms. That's their military strategy. They think that the conventional armies of NATO are much stronger than the Russians, which is true. And as a consequence, Russian military strategy says that's the reason we have to act with nuclear tactical weapons at the very beginning of a conflict. This would be a catastrophe for Ukraine, but as well to Russia and as well to parts of Western Europe.
Sigmar Gabriel, thank you so much for your time.